Chapter one introduces us to a core set of ideas, ideas that will show up in each of the subsequent chapters in the text. So, in this brief lecture, I'm just going to call your attention to what I think some of those core ideas are, but I really want you to read the chapter because you'll see interesting case studies, explanations, and examples. In fact, we start with the case of Elena. You can see right at the beginning, Elena stood up for a coworker, someone who didn't show up for an after-work event because they didn't know they were supposed to. Elena does a great job of managing the risk in this situation, and you'll see some of the specific things that she does. She takes time to let her boss calms down. She talks in a way that manages the emotion, right? She allows her boss to see a different perspective, one that her boss may not have seen because she herself was so emotional. So Elena has engaged in risk management in a way that took a situation that could be threatening to her and her coworker and actually transformed it into something good, a situation where her boss could respect Elena's communication abilities. And it probably increased her supervisor's confidence in Elena's work now and in the future. As the chapter explains, a risky situation is one that brings with it some threat. It could threaten our identity, aspects about us as individuals, like our career plans, right? Or the way that we view ourselves, or a sense of the skills that we have to do our job. But these situations also threaten relationships. We see that in the example of Elena, where her relationship with a coworker and her supervisor could be made better or worse. And you can be sure that her relationship with her coworker was greatly improved, right? And that this is something that may pay off for Elena and the coworker in the long run. Threat extends beyond just us and our relationships. In Elena's case, her supervisor's reaction may have made it impossible for this new employee to stay on the job. And that would create costs for the organization as they try to find a new employee. And a situation where that's really not necessary because it really wasn't the employee's fault that they failed to show up, right? So there could be cost to the organization. And if the organization is unable to do its job, provide its service, to plan and manage the events that we're talking about, that also is a cost to the organization and its ability to make a profit and provide a service, and to the larger community that the organization serves. Risky situations like this can feel like they're high stakes, challenging. They're the ones we sometimes call dicey, right? Um, and there are also situations where your communication choices really matter. What you say or do, or choose not to say or do, can make a huge difference in these situations. Now, as the chapter makes clear, risk sounds like something threatening and scary, and it can be for sure, but it really can be something that's good at work. When we feel risk, it's a signal. It tells us this is an important situation, right? It could be a signal that tells us something about our safety at work, and we can make adjustments to feel safer in our role, right? In our future, in our work group. Safer in the sense that we can do our jobs without feeling like we are on the spot or feeling threatened. Risk can also be good in the sense that it gives us signals that can help us make choices that allow us to be consistent with our values, right? To work in a way that feels consistent with our ethics. Lots of times, the emotion, for instance, of fear or anxiety or worry, we're feeling that because we're being asked at work to do something that just doesn't feel right to us. As the chapter talks about, risk occurs at different levels, and you can see that kind of spiral that goes from the individual to the relationship, to the organization, to the community, and the society. Well, you may be wondering, like, how can my behavior as a communicator actually manage the risk to the larger society? Well, it may not be that way today or tomorrow, but think about it. If employees speak up when they see, for instance, that their manufacturing organization is polluting the environment, if they're able to convince the organization to do better, right, or to let people know this is happening, it could result in a cleaner environment for the community in which the organization works. And we know that certain kinds of cultural prejudices about the color of someone's skin or their cultural background, can be very damaging, right? And if our organization is unable to talk about cultural differences or racial differences, that could result in tensions that spill over from the workplace into the larger community. Our organization may become that organization with the reputation that's unwelcoming or unable to be open to the people who actually live nearby in the community, the people who would be its customers and its suppliers. So risk sometimes feels like a very personal thing, but it can amplify across these levels. And that's something you need to understand and be able to trace those levels with an example from the chapter. The chapter ends by introducing a framework, the risk negotiation framework, that's important in every subsequent chapter. So let's get a handle on this way of thinking about risk. It starts by asking us to think about the history that informs a situation. A situation where you need to, for instance, give a public presentation may feel very risky to you because you don't have experience in your history or you've had some experiences in the past. But for someone else, it may be the most easy kind of communication because maybe they've had experience, let's say in high school, uh, in theater, right? Or maybe they've done public speaking in a previous job, right? But if they've done that and been embarrassed, let's say, by something the audience said, and if you read the chapter, you'll see an example of Raul, a very valued employee who was embarrassed publicly in a meeting in front of peers. That's a pretty risky thing to be criticized in front of your peers. It makes you feel like you don't fit, may cause you to question your expertise. And in this case, it caused the employee to think about going somewhere else, right? So think about the history that people have had in the past and think about the context. What is the cultural context? What kind of relationship is this? Is it one where you know the person and you have a long history of dealing with conflict, or is it a relatively new one? The book introduces a variety of different kinds of context factors to think about. Now, the good thing is these contexts come up in later chapters where we consider specific things like maintaining relationships with a difficult team member, right? Or we think about talking about cultural differences and how can that be risky or safe. These historical factors, our past experience, lead to our perception of risk, and not just ours, but how other people view a situation. A good communicator can look at the world not just from their own perspective, but from the perspective of others, from that team leader who's had a lot of experience in the past, from that new employee who doesn't know much at all about the context of this workplace. Now, those perceptions can be managed through our communication. And the risk negotiation cycle, which is introduced in this chapter, talks about those four phases, or we can think about them even as a communication task that we can complete as we manage a situation at work. First is the attending part, looking for the cues, listening closely, observing what's happening. In each of our chapters, we'll talk about some of the cues that tell us that a risk is present and that we might need to be cautious. Think of these as kind of like the warning signs. Right? Sense making is the second part of the cycle. Sometimes we know for sure that this is a risky situation, that our boss is not going to respond well, or that if we speak up, we'll actually be penalized rather than rewarded. But other times we don't. And we have to engage in sense-making conversations with peers, with more experienced workers, even with our spouse or people we know outside of work. What do they think about it? Can they help us think about the degree to which this is an important situation? Which one where we need to speak up or not? Is it one that's extremely risky or manageable? Transformation is the third phase. So this is where we actually act. we engage in communication that helps manage the risk. So Elena did that first just by like allowing her boss a little bit of time to settle down. Then she approached the boss in a way that encouraged her to look at more factors in the situation, including the experience of the new worker. It's a brand new person. They didn't know about the rules, the unspoken rules that say that they should attend an after work event. Elena transformed the risky situation through her communication, in this case by being calm, but also having the courage to speak up, right, when it could really make a difference for her coworker. Finally, maintenance is the fourth phase. When we are supervisors or where we have influence in work, what this phase is telling us to do is to think about the rules that are in place, the procedures in place that kind of govern how work goes day to day. For instance, do we have rules about who speaks up when at a team meeting, right? Do those rules make it more or less risky for people in the organization? If you're a supervisor and you want to encourage people to speak up before problems become big, what have you put in place to make it seem welcoming to speak up? Do you keep your door closed or do you keep it open? Do you walk around and talk to people or do you require them to come to you? If your door is closed and they're required to come to you, you're maintaining a work climate that probably feels risky, a little bit scary, a little bit high stakes to your employees. Well, every situation we talk about will have ways that we can create and maintain an ongoing climate that feels safer rather than riskier for employees. Depending on how we navigate this cycle, the chapter tells us, we can make situations seem more risky, like increased risk, because we've communicated in a way that threatens our identity or makes other people feel threatened, right, or put on the spot, right? We can communicate in a way that manages that risk, makes the situation safer, at least relatively safer compared to where it was before. In Elena's case, she definitely succeeded in making the situation safer, less risky for her coworker because she spoke up. Right? That doesn't mean all the risk is removed, and it doesn't mean that the coworker wouldn't experience consequences, particularly if they repeated this behavior. But relative to the situation before she spoke, right, the situation is safer. That's one outcome. And finally, we think about situations that are optimized, situations that are actually better, not just safe, but that the organization or the person is really increasing their value through their communication. So in Elena's case, she's actually done this too. Her boss now sees that Elena has a perspective that's valuable at work. She may even ask Elena in the future for her advice when situations like this come up. Because of that, Elena's career prospects might improve. She may have an improved relationship with her boss, not just a formal relationship, but one that feels more friendly, where they can share information. And that information can be so helpful to Elena as she's adjusting to this workplace and figuring out her path to success. So, to conclude, this chapter has provided you the basic tools, the basic ideas that you will use to apply in each of the 9 chapters that come after.